Hello, I'm Tom, aka Gerion. Thank you for coming to Tabletop Tap Room. Pull up a bar stool, have yourself a refreshment. Today we are interviewing Douglas Niles of TSR fame. Hello, Doug.
Hello, Tom. Nice to meet you.
I am so grateful that you consented to come on my show and be interviewed.
Well, I'm honored. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, up front, I want to apologize because while you're one of the great game designers who worked with Gygax, was there at TSR in the 70s and 80s at the beginning of the hobby, and you're an accomplished author with fiction. I really want to dive deep into Star Frontiers because that's my primary, geek nerd thing.
Yeah, I understand.
So I'm going to kind of ignore some of your other accomplishments and maybe trail back some at the end of the interview. So I just wanted to throw that apology out.
No, that was my understanding of what we're doing here too. And technically I actually started working at TSR in January of '82. So I came in that right before Star Frontiers the original game was already designed at that point, but I don't think it had been published yet.
Well, that really dovetails into a question I'm going to ask in a minute. But while we're on the topic of you coming into TSR, I always like to ask this in the interviews, just because Gygax is no longer with us. Are there any interesting stories that you have about Gary or Dave Arneson? For instance, how did you meet Gygax in the beginning?
I think it's a kind of an interesting story, actually. I did not meet Gary as a gamer. I met him as his daughter's high school speech teacher. Out of college, I was certified to teach high school speech and English, and I was teaching in a small town in Wisconsin, Clinton, Wisconsin. It's about a half hour, 40 minutes from Lake Geneva, and I had heard of Dungeons and Dragons through some friends who were doing theater and stuff like that and had played it. And I thought it sounded really cool. As a teenager, I'd done some of the Avalon Hill war games, but that's the extent of my, simulation gaming that I'd done, like Risk and all those, board game classics. But I was basically working as a very young teacher, married without any children. And, was within, I think, my second year of teaching, young lady, very, very good student in my class, gave me a pass to say she needed to be excused the following day because she was going to be interviewed by People magazine. And in this little town in Wisconsin, you don't really hear about people getting interviewed by People magazine. So I said, oh, yeah? Why is that? And she said, well, my dad invented this game. And her name was Heidi Gygax. And I didn't even know at the time that Gygax was the name of the inventor of Dungeons and Dragons. As I said, I'd never seen the game before. But I said, well, that's cool, and I had heard about the game. And when she came back to class the day after the interview, she brought me a copy of the D&D Basics at the one that's in I think it was a blue box at the time. You could only go, characters first, second, and third level. And it included a dungeon and just very, very basic rules. And I really, really liked it. And I started up by the end of that week. I was ready to run a campaign for my friends, young adults who were before we had kids, so we could get together, play late on Friday, Saturday nights. And I started a campaign of D&D that lasted a couple of years. And in the process, I met some of the students at the school where I was teaching who were also into D&D, and they asked if I could approach Gary to come in and run a session at school. So I had by this time had met him through, I think it was a parent teacher conference. So I reached out and he was happy to do that. So we had an after school gaming session in my classroom, and I was a lot of kids showed up, and it was pretty cool. And I got to watch him run an adventure. And so that was, I wasn't saying I wasn't great friends with him or anything, but I had met him and had been impressed by him, and also really liked his game. I started doing advanced Dungeons and Dragons and went into, higher levels and doing my own world building and stuff like that. And in fact, one of the young adults that I had in my game went on to become an editor for Dragon magazine, which was also published in Lake Geneva, right up the road from where we lived. And he had called me up in the summer of '81 to say, I hear that the game department is hiring designers. They were right in the beginning of a big explosion of popularity. At that point, there were Zeb Cook was working there, Tom Moldvay. There were not a lot of staff designers. There were some good editors. Steve Winter, who still is connected with Wizards of the Coast, was an excellent editor. I worked with on a lot of things, and so they needed staff, and it was probably a kind of a rare window in the industry where they were willing to hire people basically off the street, as long as I did go through 5 interviews, and as it happened, I had started. I've been inspired enough by role playing, by D&D, that I started to write a novel, and I ended up finishing it right about the time I was applying for the job. So I had a completed fantasy novel manuscript. I had the dungeons of the campaign world that I had designed. I was basically familiar with D&D, though. I hadn't played Boot Hill. I didn't know about Star Frontiers. I was aware of Traveler, which at that point was probably the mainstay of the science fiction role-playing field. And one of the first things, so when I did get hired, I know I applied for the job early in the school year. So I'm going to say like September. And I went through a series of 5 interviews, each with higher level echelons of the company. And then they told me about Thanksgiving that I was hired. And so I finished teaching out the first semester of school. And then in a weekend in the middle of January, and Friday, I left my teaching job. And on Monday morning, I started working in the office in Lake Geneva. And right away, the first thing they did was ask me to familiarize myself with these other games. Boot Hill, I remember, and the Star Frontiers, the prototypes. So I started to look at the game then, and I thought it was very interesting. But I came into it after the original game system was designed.
Okay. Well, I'm so glad I asked that, because that's the coolest story, that you met Gygax in a parent-teacher conference. and I'm sure my wife is a special ed director in a school district here in Maine, so she's going to love that when she hears that.
Oh, good. Yeah. My wife is a special ed teacher too.
My wife's going to love that even more, because that's her jam. But so the rules were already written, from what I might understand. Now I see that I saw that you were credited as helping. That I believe it was Moldvay and somebody else, and then with Doug Niles for the Crash on Volturnus module. That you had some input to that.
That was in the original box set, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was my introduction. Now that you meant, I bet Dave Cook was or Zeb.
I could pull it up, but I'd be screwing around with the computer.
Yeah, that's fine. I think but I'm pretty sure it would have been Zeb and Moldvay that were the primary designers. And then, I just came in as sort of like to help with play testing, and I maybe did some character creation or something like that too. But that was the original module that went in the original game.
Yeah.
Which I did not remember the name of when you first mentioned it. So I'm glad that we got that clarified.
Well, there was a Dave. Funny you mentioned Dave Winters earlier.
Or Steve Winter.
Excuse me, Steve Winters. He wrote a review in the Polyhedron magazine, and in there he described Crash on Volturnus as being a golden age sci-fi adventure. I was wondering. I know you can't speak for him, but I'm like, what did that really mean that you made that adventure a golden age? What was the inspiration for Crash on, if you can speak to that?
Well, I mean, I guess in a broader sense, their inspiration for Star Frontiers in general was it did not want to be Star Wars, although it wanted to, attract Star Wars fans. It did not want to be Star Trek, and it did not want to be Traveler. So it was seeking its own identity. And I think those classic you know, I'm thinking 1950s sci-fi movies might have been, we all really appreciated that kind of that cinema, and I think that's what Steve was going for. I remember he had some old movie posters up in his office that were I can't say for sure. Well, I think one of them was Zulu Dawn, but you know, so I think there was a kind of a Hollywood feeling to what the golden age. Although, you know, he's also was a very literary guy. He's still very much alive and kicking. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was also thinking in terms of the, you know, Amazing Stories magazines and the science fiction, the Heinlein, you know, stories from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Osmos magazine, probably
Yeah,
too.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was the editor of Amazing Stories for a while, right? Was it amazing, or was that a different one?
It's been so long. I grew up, my father was in the Air Force, and some of the young GIs who worked for him gave me a pile of Amazing Stories and Osmov magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just I used to devour and read stuff. And so I remember those, and I remember some great stories from those. And
yeah, that'd be the golden age, I think.
Yeah, so I benefited from that they were just done. You know, they were done with them, and they, you know, they're getting sent to a new base. They don't want to truck them with them. They dumped them on me. It was great. So the interview, I mean, the review that was written in Polyhedron magazine in Gen Con in 1982 was in August, and that's when Star Frontiers debuted.
Yes.
And then the review was done in December. So I'm assuming that the whole review was written at least by November. So in there, Winters went into the sales numbers for Star Frontiers compared to the other two big products. One was Space Opera, which had been selling about 10,000 copies a year. Mm-hmm. And Traveler, since 77, had been selling an average of 50,000 copies a year. And mm-hmm. Star Frontiers, in that little brief window of like about 3 to 4 months, sold 49,500, just shy of 50,000.
Okay.
So, you know, they were touting that. And I was just, how excited were they around the office that Star Frontiers was doing so well when, I mean, sure, it was riding the coattails of, you know, Gen Con, riding the coattails of,
D&D.
Yeah, D&D is the 900-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, what was the buzz? What was the feeling around the office that about Star Frontiers at that time?
Well, I think it was pretty positive. This happened before I think there had been some hurt feelings about the way the assignments were handled out, and I think Zeb and Tom were they both had done a really good job. We had brought in another guy from I think from Milton Bradley of all places, and he'd sort of started taking over some of the responsibility, and so there was a little bit of a political football, if you will, in terms of the company politics. I think that had something to do with me as the new guy getting assigned the Nighthawks, the first supplement. So I wouldn't say that everybody was elated. I think that the Tom and Zeb were real serious, very accomplished game designers, and I think they felt that some of the game had been stripped down too much, that there were things that they wished had gone in there that maybe even had been designed and intended to go in there that had been removed to kind of make it a sort of a basic game. And so I do remember it wasn't just all, you know, bouquets and champagne. There was some hurt feelings, but those guys were pros, and I was a newbie on their staff, and when I got assigned what was a very, very plumb game design job, they were both really classy and helped me in any way they could with the Nighthawk system. The company had also hired Tracy Hickman and Jeff Grubb within the months right after I started this. So the first half of 82 brought in a number of people that ended up having pretty good careers in gaming. And I know Tracy sat down with me and we spent a whole after he went over the mechanics of spaceship movement in Traveler, which I'm not familiar with. I'd seen the game, but I hadn't played it. So he gave me a crash course in that, and we were all in the spirit of brainstorming as a group. It was a real fruitful time at the company.
So I'm just out of curiosity. I mean, did they have like an established team, or was it just everybody would contribute? You mentioned brainstorming. Did just everybody pile on, or was there like an established team that worked on these products?
It was kind of ad hoc. So Star Wars was, again, D&D was, the company was making its money, and Dungeons and Dragons was its flagship. So whatever the Dungeons and Dragons, the major projects came along, those were, plums from a designer perspective. And but I just took the shrink wrap off this box of mine today. I had to open it, but I thought I should at least look at to see what was in there. And that was the first game system that I had a chance to design, as opposed to a role-playing adventure, an actual, game mechanics and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. And I remember having a lot of willing collaborators and people who are willing to kibitz on it. I actually checked the credits just when I opened it up again, and I saw that I'm credited as the designer, which is how I remembered it. And Steve Winter was the editor, and he was probably the best editor I've ever worked with. I worked with him on some war game projects, on lots of role playing projects, and he's just really thorough and very very well smart and much more experienced than I was at that time. So he helped me a lot with the design of the game system and the presentation of it. So I would say he and Steve and I were the two that did the most work as a team on this, and other people were more of the the bullpen session, kibitz, kind of getting advice and play testing. We had a regular Thursday afternoon play test session, which we would do whatever people were working on, would bring it in, and we'd roust up other staff people. We had several people who were not called, their job title was developers, who were kind of interim between the design step and the editing step of a process. I know Ed Solers and John Pickens were two of those guys, and they had most of their background in D&D, but they also helped a lot with putting products like the new things that we were coming out with. The other another fellow who was there when I started was Mark Akers, and he had just finished designing the Gangbusters, the like Roaring Twenties gangster role playing game, and that was a brand new thing that came out about the same time as Star Frontiers, as I recall. I think they both came out in '82.
They both debuted at Gen Con.
Yeah, and that was, by the way, the first Gen Con I ever went to was 1982. So I kind of got a eyes wide open look at how big this hobby is that I had sort of come into from the back door, if you will.
So one more reference to that review by Winters. He mentioned in there that there was as he was doing the review, that there was a separate book on frontier worlds, star system and planet creation and adventures that's being planned. Now, this book never materialized, but I suspect that the star system and planet creation, that ended up in the Ares magazine, which was an article for Star Frontiers Creating Systems. And then all of these worlds, these extra worlds, I believe that ended up in Zebulon's Guide.
That sounds right. I as far as I know, Nighthawks, which is basically the spaceship rules for Star Frontiers, was the only boxed game supplement, the only one that I can recall. But there were like the things for World Beneath. There were adventures we did. We got some of the best artists in the kind at that time. TSR's art staff was like the best group of fantasy artists anywhere in the world. I remember Larry Elmore did a fantastic cover for a Mission to Alcazar module that I wrote,
Oh, jeez.
where I had a kind of a gnarly Jeep back then, and I used to take it out west and do some jeeping around in the Rocky Mountains and stuff. And I was telling him how cool it would be to have a science fiction vehicle that would leap over rivers and stuff like that. And he painted this dynamic scene of just such a vehicle. I think it was like almost airborne and landing on one tire. And there was what are those, the big shaggy guys that kind of
the Yazarians.
What are they?
The Yazarians.
Yazarians, yes. So he was up with a dual machine gun shooting out of a turret. It was I love that painting. But to get an artist of his quality assigned to this line was a nice coup, and evidence that the company was really trying to back it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he did the classic
yes
artwork as well. That's just just one of my favorites.
Is that now Alpha Dawn? Is that the adventure that was included in the original game box?
This is the a few years ago, like 2018, Evil Hat made a play for the Star Frontiers trademark. And so Wizards of the Coast put everything up on drive-through. You could, to prove that they were still making money from it.
Uh-huh.
So this is the hardcover book for Alpha Dawn. It's the Alpha Dawn rules and the module Crash on Volturnus all in one hard.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
And my stuff is so beat up now at this point. I was like, I'm going to get the hardcover and retire everything else.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's nice. That's a beautiful. I had not seen that book before, but I remember the artwork on the cover.
Yeah, same with the Nighthawks. Same with your book. I did the same thing because
good. That's nice to see that that's still out there. Yeah, I always like that painting of the two assault scouts attacking the destroyer. That's on this cover, right?
Yep, that's Elmore.
Yeah. So he had just joined the company then too, in '82. So those were some of the first things he did.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize that those were some of the first things he did. I just know that it's like, woo, Elmore, holy grail.
And his background was he was an illustrator for the U.S. Army.
I did read that.
Yeah, he had some interesting work there too. Very nice man too.
Yeah, I recently had a little email kibitz with him, and he came across as a very nice guy. And I can't speak more highly of him. I don't really know him personally, but I certainly enjoyed our conversation. That was awesome.
He's very, very personable. I haven't talked to him in, I'm sure, 20 years, but he was a really, really good guy to work with. And
oh, I wish I could have worked with him.
No doubt.
So Nighthawks, that appears it was your baby. You kind of touched on that. But one of the things that a lot of people have commented on is that it seems to be World War II in space. In fact, I talked to a gamer once. He says, yeah, he named some Pacific battle during World War II. He says, we replayed that battle with Nighthawks. He says, it took like a day and a half.
Wow. That's interesting. I am very much a World War II military history buff. That was not conscious. In fact, I would not have drawn that comparison. But there were some things. I remember one of the biggest decisions to make before we started is, were we going to have some magic way to create gravity? Like, for example, Star Wars does. There's gravity in all those ships, and they flick a switch and get gravity, because it's really hard to film a scene in zero gravity, for one thing. But it also just it makes a lot of other things really easier. And so I was a little bit I didn't want to do that kind of magic sort of thing. So I went with using acceleration and deceleration as the source of gravity in Nighthawks, which I think sets it apart from a lot of the other space games. But maybe it does make it a little more like, the physics of aircraft generally apply, or something like that. That might be where that idea comes from. I had not thought of that. I did, on a little side note, I did write a short story for Dragonlance in which I used the Battle of Midway as the inspiration for a battle involving armies of elves and bad guys, with the dragons flying overhead being like the air groups from the naval task forces and basically modeled the encounter on what happened in Midway. So interesting to hear that might have been applied to Nighthawks also.
Well, since you brought up no artificial gravity, I want to say thank you. One of my favorite elements of the game has been that it's simulated gravity through thrust and no artificial gravity, and so that's interesting to learn. And I can the uniqueness of your decision to do that, I can comment on that. I have not seen it in any other role-playing game up until I recently came across some material for the Expanse role-playing game, and it appears that they did the same thing. And the Expanse is like a hot new sci-fi product right now, on TV. So all this time, 40 years, you were unique and cutting edge, and nobody has really copied that at all.
Well, and I can understand why not too, because it is limiting in certain senses too. And the more I learned about it, I realized that the amount of thrust that would be required to, reach light speed was going to be like 10,000 G's. So we did end up having to fudge it just so ships could travel from one system to another. But yeah, it was the basic kernel that I was kind of happy to try to carry through in the game.
So what was the inspiration for the Assault Scout? It's a great one-party ship, for a party of role-playing game group, and it's been iconic. It's been the favorite of fans for all these decades. Well,
yeah, it is designed for a role-playing party. So I'd be lying if I said it. I didn't, have the Millennium Falcon at least somewhere in my awareness as I was doing this. It's not like it isn't the Millennium Falcon, the Assault Scout, but the idea that a small ship can be powerfully armed, very fast, and there can be jobs for every. You can have a crew of 4, 5, 8 people, and everybody can have an important job on it. Made it appealing as a vehicle for role-playing games. And it's also, it's kind of like, again, going back to World War II, like the PT boats, an area where you're not dealing with a aircraft carrier or a battleship or something like that. You've got a small, intimate crew where you can name everybody and get out there and move quickly and hit hard and try to get away fast. So I think it was just a natural vehicle for a role-playing party, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, I always thought that the Assault Scout reminded me of the PT boats.
Oh, cool.
So now there's in Warriors of White Light module, I don't think you actually worked on that per se.
It doesn't sound familiar.
That's the bundled module that came with Nighthawks.
Oh.
And so I have one question concerning that. There's this odd little thing in there that in the setting, but if you didn't work on it, I doubt you're going to be able to, because it's kind of me going a little bit deep into the weeds of the material.
Okay, yeah, I'm not even finding a module in my box here.
Yes, it should be called Warriors of White Light, and it was just you join the militia, and so it's ensigns who've just joined the Royal Marine Militia set in the Clarion star system, and there's about 5 little,
I wonder what the copyright on it, because that might have been added a little later.
It came in the box. It's actually right here at the back. They had this cover.
Okay, yeah. Right.
They had this cover, but it wasn't really the cover to the module. They just put it on there to protect it, and then the module was.
Right. Yeah. And I am credited as the writer.
Oh, for Warriors of White Light.
Yeah. But I just forgot. I actually forgot that there was this adventure in here. I'm sorry.
Oh,
we're talking, almost 40 years.
Well, then I'm going to wind up a fire on this question. It gets into something. in the setting there for the Clarion star system, there's a monarchy. The Navy is called the Royal Marines. And there was this little detail included in the setting that use of the word gollywog was an insult, and that people from other planets would call the inhabitants of Clarion, they would call the planet gollywog. And this was an insult that was like fighting words, throw down and punch somebody in the nose. And then it came to light a few years ago that actually gollywog was this racial-ish thing, particularly in Britain, of a little black doll, and I'm wondering if was there any intentional connection between the two.
When you mentioned the term, I didn't even remember it from the game, but it did make me think of a British racial insult. And,
yes.
I wouldn't be surprised if Steve, I think he probably edited this too. Steve was really, I told you that he had a picture of Zulu Dawn up in his office, and he was really into the whole Victorian era. He would do miniature battles of Zulus and British and stuff like that. And he was very, very well informed about the British Empire. And I wouldn't be surprised if he brought that up as a sort of a subtle parallel to real life.
Okay, well, I just got thinking about it, that there's an actual famous space opera series of novels where the royal family of this planet is they're actually black, within the story, and it kind of dovetails off of this little piece of the setting. And I was wondering if there was an intention that the crown of Clarion, that the royal family would be, people of color. And that's why the insult was ported over. I don't think that there was any real racism on going on, but I just wondered if the implication was that the royal family, the elites of this society, were actually people of color.
That's it's a good question. I don't recall. I mean, if the people from Clarion were called gollywogs, that would suggest to me that they were the subjects of prejudice from the surrounding people. And that might be a little more woke than what we were in the mid 1980s. I mean, we were, as a design staff, we were all Northerners, and we had no doubts about what the Civil War had been about, and that it was a war worth fighting. And from that military history point of view, but I don't think we made any attempt to try to specifically project that into the game system. That kind of, to try to make it a racial issue, I don't think was on anyone's mind.
All right. Well, that for me, it does clear it up a little bit. I kind of feel good about that. So Dramune Run was a module written by you.
Yes, I remember that one.
And 7 years ago, the Frontier Explorer ran a poll to discover the all-time greatest Star Frontiers module, and Dramune Run took second place.
Wow.
And it was universally recognized as the best Nighthawks module. As I researched the interview, I also discovered that Dramune Run is held in the collection of the Strong National Museum of Play.
Really?
So were you aware that your gaming works are garnering accolades? And how do you feel about 40 years later, something you worked on is now going to be in the Museum of Play?
I have to say, Tom, it feels pretty darn good. I remember being really excited about writing Drum. I couldn't tell you much about what it's about right now, but I do remember it as a project that I was really proud of and very happy to write. And I think it was maybe the first Nighthawks module after the box came out.
Right.
This is a little bit of an aside, but kind of maybe gets to your question. I was a guest of a show in Italy 3 years ago, the Lucca Comics and Games Convention. It's a big comic heavy, but also a very strong role playing presence in Lucca, Italy. And I mean, it was a wonderful opportunity for me. They paid for me and my wife to come over there and stay in this beautiful medieval town, and that was basically just taken over by 100,000 gamers and comics fans for a 5-day run. I ran Gary's classic Tomb of Horrors AD&D module for a tournament that they were having, and did some seminars, and I just had a really, really good time. But part of one of the sponsors that paid for my visit was a fellow who had a small publishing and retail game company in northern Italy, in Milan. And he had a booth, and they had the dealer area there was about as big as I remember from the olden days of Gen Con. It was a huge, cavernous room with lots and lots of stalls in it. And he had a very busy booth, but I had a table off to the side, and people, I was signing for an hour every day in a country that I had never visited before. And people were lining up, sometimes 8, 10, 15 deep with my modules, D&D modules, but modules that have been translated into Italian, and bringing them up and coming and explaining that I started playing this game when I was a kid, and now my son I'm the dungeon master for my son and his friends, and they're playing this Saber River module, or some of these other modules that I had written. I was on in the 80s was when I was on staff at TSR. I did some freelance game design in the 90s, but almost all of my module work was done in the 80s. So these were old projects, and I couldn't tell you how gratifying it was to see how much people were still having fun with these things and carrying it on into the next generation. And so yeah, it really, and from what you just told me about Dramune Run, that's very very nice to hear. That still kind of amazes me, but I'm really glad that there's still people that appreciate this stuff and enjoy it.
And Mission to Alcazar was also written by you and judged by fans to be the greatest Star Frontiers module of all time. You actually
You're kidding.
the Elmore picture earlier.
Wow. Now when you told me Dramune Run was second, I was like, wow, I wonder what was the first one. I never thought it would be that one.
So yeah, because I'm sitting here going, you put these questions together and you're not sure sometimes what order they should be in, but so it's the most popular, not to mention it's all the Legion of Great Dungeons and Dragons modules that you've done. What advice would you give to an aspiring RPG adventure writers on how to write a good adventure?
Wow. Well, think of what you would like to play. Obviously, that I think that's a beginning startup. Think of a big bad. The villain, and try to give your villain some depth and something that is makes him worthy of being your antagonist, and then come up with tiers of this is not anything revolutionary that I'm saying, but I think it's a fairly common way to construct an adventure story. Is that the James Bond movies do the same thing, where you meet some of the outer accessories to the big bad guy, and when you defeat them, you learn something that takes you closer and closer. I think settings, obviously in D&D or any kind of role-playing, settings are really important. So again, I don't know why I probably because I just saw No Time to Die, and it was reminded me of some of the best things about the Bond movies, but having a location at the center of the antagonist's environment that becomes a place of focus to the adventure really, I think, can help to drive things along and give people a sense of having a concrete objective. So those are a couple bits of advice. Also, try to have something for everybody to do. If you have a cleric, then make sure that there's some undead or something that where they're gonna come in handy, and that kind of thing.
Robots for the roboticists.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, I keep lapsing into I did about 10 times more D&D work than Star Frontiers.
We know what you mean. So
Okay.
we talked about the two what were judged the two best, greatest Star Frontiers modules. There are two that were judged the absolute worst, and I know you didn't work on them, or at least I don't. Well,
That's a
maybe.
relief.
And these were the licensed modules for 2001 and 2010. And the fans have universally panned these. They were judged to be the worst. 2001 was actually released 16 years, after the movie was released 16 years before the module. And I think the only reason we got 2001 was because 2010 was a hot new thing in movie theaters. Was there never any discussion of TSR licensing something like Aliens, or maybe the Roger Corman classic Battle Beyond the Stars, or even Predator?
No, we didn't even begin to dabble into licensing like that until I think the big breakthrough in that department was, and Jeff Grubb was the driving force behind that, was Marvel Universe and getting access. I think that if I'm not mistaken, that's about where TSR's licensing department came into being, so they could deal with Marvel and then design that game. I know that they did some smaller. For example, I wrote an Endless Quest book that was set in the Tarzan world, and that was kind of unique because the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate wasn't licensing Tarzan out for much to be used, but TSR got the right to do him as a story character. And then I forgot Indiana Jones was another. That was another one that was a huge licensing coup. But I don't think Star Wars within the company economics was a big enough product that they were going to buy a really expensive license to do it. Indiana Jones was its own role-playing game,
right?
And Marvel, actually, so was Marvel. Now that I think of it, so those both became role-playing games. Marvel, I think, was an unquestioned success, and I don't know how the indie game did.
Any idea about the 2001 modules, whether they were commercial success or not?
I frankly didn't even know they existed. I'm sorry. I've been that much removed from this. I left the company on good terms in 1990, and so okay. I did a lot of some freelance game design work in the early 90s, but a lot of it was more military board games, like the European Theater of War simulation game for SPI, and then I did almost exclusively novels from the mid 90s through about 2008, when they, for some reason, discontinued the Dragonlance line. But that was my bread and butter, was writing Dragonlance novels.
Okay.
I was one of the game designers on the Dragonlance series too.
Yeah. And I wish I could actually delve into Dragonlance, but I've got a few more questions on Star Frontiers here. So the game comes out in 82, and then 86, you have Kim Eastland got the Zebulon's Guide project, which, according to a phone interview by him that I referenced earlier at a fan convention, was going to be a full second edition of the game with 14 volumes. However, so he was going to take Star Frontiers in a Gamma World direction, with two of the new player character species straight out of his personal Gamma World, tabletop game.
Mm-hmm.
And he introduced these plague worlds, and he stated that he hated the timeline and he hated Nighthawks, and he planned to redo these. What happened at TSR that there was such a radical shift in vision away from what seemed to be a successful product line?
I didn't know, and I really don't know what Kim's relationship with the company was. I don't think he wasn't on the design staff. So maybe it was a marketing tool or something like that. I knew him. I knew who he was. I probably, had a couple of brief conversations with him, but I had no idea that there was anything like this. And I guess I don't want to I'm just not entirely sure that that was a corporate vision as much as his vision.
Well, he is credited as writing Zebulon's Guide. And then, of course, it got canceled when Lorraine Williams came in and took over because she had the
Buck Rogers, yeah.
Buck Rogers IP. You know, and let me just read my notes here real quick. You know, I'm just it just boggled my mind that suddenly and I get it that she's the CEO and she owns an IP, and you know it just makes sense that she'd want to do it that way. But you know, they were going to produce an RPG that was setting from out of the 1920s and 1930s, and I don't think anybody really had a connection to it, and I just didn't get it. And of course, you know, a lot of fans, and I've been one of them, and I've got friends, I could name them,
Yeah.
them off, who absolutely hate her for canceling Star Frontiers.
Well, you know, it's until you mentioned that, I had forgotten, but that is one reason, probably the main reason, that the Star Frontiers as a science fiction game line fizzled, is because she did. I think one of the reasons that she bought TSR was as a vehicle for restoring Buck Rogers to prominence, which it wasn't. It was a tough mountain to climb, and I don't think it ever really worked. I know that we did a board game, pretty expensive board game with lots of plastic components and a hard board and stuff like that for Buck Rogers, and several other products. I didn't end up. Oh, this is a slightly naughty story, but when the reason that I left the company in 1990, I was really happy doing what I was doing there, and had been allowed to start working from home because I was proving to be very productive, you know, working on my own, but it was also creating for my boss, whom I really respect, Jim Ward. Is he's the designer of Gamma World and a very, very famous and highly regarded man in the industry still. So he was presented with a problem of having this one game designer that was allowed to work at home, and then they didn't want to just make this an open office. So I remember I went in at the end of 1989 to see my assignments for the next year, and he had me down to design 6 Buck Rogers modules. That was going to be my 1990 work slate, and I said to him in perfectly. Again, this was very amicable. I wasn't feeling like I was being punished or something, but I said, "Oh, so Jim, this is your way of telling me it's time to start my freelance career." He said, "Well, you do what you got to do." So I resigned, but I kept getting work from, and I liked the work that I was doing, but obviously as a staff designer, you get assigned your project, and I think that they were not. Let's just say that Buck Rogers modules were not considered plum projects in the design department of TSR at any point.
I know that they really didn't sell. I think in the end they ended up in a landfill.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I don't know how many they continued to do, but it's. I mean, Lorraine she had her own motivations, but she did kind of save the company too. So
yeah,
there's I have mixed.
I'm not trying to bash Lorraine, out of hand.
Yeah, but I understand. She was unpopular with an awful lot of people, and
she's hated within the Star Frontiers community.
Right, I could especially see that because Star Frontiers was probably the biggest casualty of her taking over the company.
Well, rumor has it that the deal she cut with herself as CEO, that she negotiated with herself as IP owner, was that the IP owners would get paid for everything printed, not everything sold. So it was just turn them out, just something new. And so there is a lot of Buck Rogers product in the catalog, and rumor has it really didn't sell.
Okay, that I can't confirm or deny, but it certainly
So that's the rumor. And
Yeah.
I haven't. And again, I was kind of hoping maybe you could confirm it, but you can't. So that's where it is. Now you are an accomplished author, and you've written a lot of science fiction and fantasy. Which do you like working on more, games or novels?
Writing fiction.
Yeah.
It's more organic. It just kind of like flows, and there's a lot more diagramming and math involved in game design. Um, I probably my favorite kind of fiction that I've written are alternate history military stories, where I did this with a co-author. We wrote a couple of books about Erwin. What if Hitler had been killed in the bomb plot, and how
Oh,
the
yeah.
World War II in Europe might have progressed and things like that. And those were really fascinating. But I also really liked writing fantasy stories, and I did have a chance to write some science fiction too, which it was a short-lived series that I was the lead author on for a series called Seals, which basically projects like 100 years in the future, and it's an Earth-centric science fiction series where the Navy SEALs are actually sea, air, land, and space. The S at the end stands for space, and so they dealt with the first one of those was a mission on Mars, and then they encountered an alien race that got them to a different galaxy, and so they were kind of like tactical commando stories, space opera, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to write.
I'm gonna have to look those up because it sounds like it's right up my alley.
The series it was envisioned as a longer series, and I think we only did the 2 books.
Okay.
But they're out of print, but they might be available somewhere. You know how it is.
They're on eBay, I bet.
Yeah, right.
So I was going to say when you said alternate history, your pen name isn't Harry Turtledove, is it?
No, he's the major league star in alternate history.
Yeah. Oh, a Harry Turtledove fan for sure.
Oh yeah, I've enjoyed a number of his books. We tried to intentionally take it in a different direction, though. Like in Guns of the South, for example, the change he makes to history is so substantial. Like 100,000 AK-47s in the hands of the Confederate Army. Well, that will change history. So Dobson and I, when we wrote about the death of Hitler, we wanted to change the minimum amount necessary. So we just had the officer that ended up pushing the bomb, actually not knowing it was a bomb, pushing the briefcase behind a concrete table leg so that when it blew up, Hitler was shielded. We had him get the urge to sneeze when he was about to move the briefcase, and so he quick stood up, and he didn't move the briefcase, and the bomb went off as planned and actually killed Hitler. And then so everything we did was ripples flowing out from that. So it was, in fact, there's a Isaac Asimov story where they do patrol the time stream, and their motto is MNF, the minimum necessary, MNC, the minimum necessary change to actually get history going back in the direction you want it to go. Though Turtletove kind of did his a different way, but he's an entertaining writer.
Oh yeah, well, he kind of hacks and slashes history a little bit, and it's fun. It's fun to think what would history be like with aliens showing up in the middle of World War II.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was quite a epic.
So yeah, I that's what hooked me in, and I started reading him back through the 90s.
Yeah, cool.
So I want to thank you for taking so much time, and I really appreciate it greatly.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Tom, and thanks. Are you bringing back a lot of memories? I wish I could have brought more actual facts to the conversation, but you're causing me to remember things, and it was a very, very fun period of my life, and kind of a exciting period in the game industry too, I think.
And I'm going to say that my favorite part of this interview was learning that you met Gary Gygax at a parent-teacher conference. The best.
I like that story myself. That's true.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Tom. Have a good one.
We're signing out for Tabletop Tap Room. Please consider giving us a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you are notified of upcoming content. Thank you, and keep on gaming.